the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9. I've never seen such idiots in all my life.
Listen to all this,
Yeah, couldn't agree more.
Like a furry torpedo to the jugular. This is Honey Badger Radio. Radio with Buddy.
But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Hello and welcome to HBR Talk 269. This often weaponized fact is wrong. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with nonsense annihilator Lauren Brooks and the personification of perceptivity, Mike Stevenson, to continue digging into actually, we aren't going to continue digging because that was what I wrote last week. Where did what I wrote this week go? Well, there's our first technical difficulty. Apparently, I must have hit Control-Z at some point, and it undid that. That's okay. So we're going to go through this article about the 2% woozle. The 2% woozle being the woozle claim that only 2% of rape allegations are false. This article is by Rick Bradford of the Center for Male Psychology. It's not a new article like recent, but this is a tool that I think that everybody needs to be aware of because we get hit with this in debate a lot. But before we do that, before we go over that, we do got to do what we got to do. As always, Honey Badger Radio dishes out a smorgasbord of thought-provoking discussions, and as experiences both recent and long past have demonstrated, the provoked thoughts are fighting back. They've made it clear that for people like us, relying on third-party payment platforms like Patreon to fund our work is treading on thin ice, or building our house in the path of a rapidly growing wildfire. Possibly one set by female firefighters in Canada. In light of this, I still can't believe that smoke made it all the way down here to my nose. In light of this, we strongly encourage our supporters to switch at least their support for us to feedthebadger.com, the most stable way to help us out. And if you want to tip us directly instead of relying on any social media platforms tip jar, the link for that is feedthebadger.com/justthetip. And as always, the same risk applies to our social media platforms, which is why you should further provoke the thought police by tracking our thought-provoking discussions on honeybadgerbrigade.com, where you can find your way to all of our content, as well as a link to feedthebadger.com in the drop-down menu at the top of the page. So, on the subject of due process, and this is really on the subject of due process, we find ourselves very often in heated debate with feminists who treat the civil right as a barrier to justice, rather than recognizing it and in its actual nature as a protection against injustice. Wrongful imprisonment is an injustice. Many of their arguments on this front rely on fallacies, and the most oft-repeated fallacy is twofold. Obviously, the first part is the unfounded claim that rarity can make an injustice less egregious and less worthy of corrective action, and that's based on the woozle that this injustice in particular is exceedingly rare. By taking down that woozle, Rick Bradford counters both. So I really wanted to go over this in part just because, part of what we do as a movement, a big part of what we do as a movement is push and pull on that Overton window in regard to how people view their civil rights, and in particular, people's willingness to throw men's civil rights under the bus, under the guise of protecting women's safety. We want to get that Overton window all the way over to no, civil rights are not compromisable things. They're not things that you can just give up for safety nets, particularly safety nets that aren't even real. But safety nets are dangerous, and in fact, all the time. I've gone over that in many ways and many times, but in this instance, we want to point out that it's not even for a safety net. In this instance, it's for a lie. So having this tool to push on that Overton window, to keep that Overton window at no, we don't give up that civil right for this perceived safety net. That's very important. So, going to get us out of the open screen here. This, like I said, is from the Center for Male Psychology. You can see their header at the top of the article here on the screen. And the title is False Allegations of Rape. The True Extent Remains Unknown. And this is something that I think is very important for us to understand. We make a lot of claims back and forth between us and feminists. There are very different standards within different types of research, and very different methods to determine whether an allegation meets the standard for being deemed false by the researchers. And that really makes it difficult to settle on a number. So the first paragraph, the mental health impact on a man of having a false allegation of rape made against him can be devastating, and it is not uncommon for such men to become suicidal. However, the quest to estimate the rate of false allegations of rape is like hunting the snark. One does not even know what it is. I think that for Americans that would be snipe hunting. One does not even know what it is one is looking for, let alone where to find it. Unlike the snark, however, we know it exists. I focus here on female victims. Perpetrators of rape in English law are necessarily biological males. And that's the first thing to point out. How do we know how many allegations exist in the UK? Because we don't know how many women are accused, right? So when we say what percentage, are we talking about just percentage against men, just percentage of female accusers? Because men already face the injustice that when they are raped, if they are in the UK, unlike if they were the perpetrator, their perpetrator doesn't face the punishment of the stigma of the label rapist, like a male perpetrator would. So he goes on, what constitutes an allegation? An anonymous claim in a social media post, such as #MeToo, or an allegation made within a family court submission over a contested child contact where bitterness is the ruling passion, or a report to the police, which may not result in a prosecution, or perhaps only those that do. And what does false mean? Certainly an allegation which is entirely fabricated, where no sexual encounter at all ever took place, would be false. But what if sexual intercourse did take place and is not disputed, but consent is disputed? How can we ever know the truth about consent really? Conviction does not necessarily mean the defendant was truly guilty, and exoneration does not necessarily mean he was innocent. So I want to go over something in here. This is like the first thing I really wanted to make a point on, and I've talked about this on Twitter, and people kind of took it wrong, as me saying that we should presume guilt. It's not that we should presume guilt. It's that society does presume guilt. Mm-hmm. So when a man is accused of rape, in particular a man, because women get away with a lot of stuff, like people will treat it as not even a big deal if a woman's accused of raping a man. Right? They'll think it's funny. They'll act like it's, well, he was lucky. He probably liked it. Blah, blah, blah. All the stupid, thoughtless, heartless comments that people make about male victims. Right? But when a man is accused, if he is proved innocent, there will still be people that think of him as a rapist who got away with it. Mm-hmm. Right? There will still be people who will talk about him as a rapist who got away with it, and there will still be people who will treat him as a rapist who got away with it, especially if they're not familiar with the case. It'll make it more difficult for him to find employment, because the news articles that come up on searches that his employer will do on search engines to find out what his reputation is won't necessarily come up in any particular order. So if he is exonerated, the exoneration article might not be in the top of the search, might not be on the first page of the search, might not be even prominent in the search results. He may have to actually bring it up himself, which is very uncomfortable, and of course dredges it up every single time. His social circle, what's his social circle going to do? They're going to be divided. 7 years in hell guy has lost friends over his allegations that he faced, even though it was not just proved, it was conclusively proved, it was irrefutably proved that he was elsewhere during every single point in time where she named a place and time and date in an allegation. And yet there are people who will not associate with him anymore because they think that he's a wife beater and a rapist who got away with it by getting his accuser declared a vexatious litigant for complaining about his actions. Despite all of that evidence. Right?
It's ridiculous. I mean, I don't know how I would feel being a man these days. I think I would almost have to walk around with a body camera on, because it's so often it's just one person's word against the other. And if you don't have the actual evidence, if you can't hear the words coming out of the other person's mouth, then you're screwed. It's always going to be you versus your word versus the other person's. And God, how do you not walk around feeling like there's a sword of Damocles over your head
all the time?
All the time.
Yeah. And I have always, I've always been passionate about this, but my level of understanding was a fraction before 2019 of what it became in 2019, because that's when, that's when I was assaulted at work, and then had to prove that I didn't get into a fight. And I hate talking about this because it's embarrassing, because I got my ass kicked, but I got my ass kicked because I didn't fight back. And also because the person who attacked me was 20 years younger than me. From her perspective, she attacked an old lady. Like, I'm not old, I'm only middle-aged, but still. In any case, to this day, I run into people from my company because I'm a direct support professional for intellectually disabled adults. It's a very professional environment, right? This is not some place where you would expect something like this to happen. It's like getting attacked in an office at a corporate headquarters or something. It's by another medical professional in a hospital. It should never have happened. But in any case, the fact that it did has people assuming that I did something to this assailant of mine. And so when we have people that come PRN or as a substitute to the homes where I work, and they're from other homes where, like, the gossip got there, but not all of the facts got there, they come in and they sort of treat me like I'm a bomb that's going to go off. And it's every single time I always feel bad about it. It's like, I did nothing. I literally just did my job, and I went through this ordeal, and I went through this ordeal because somebody didn't want to do their job, and I wouldn't cover for them. That was basically the underlying fact. And even the judge apologized to me. Like, that's when a judge apologizes to you for the ordeal that you went through. It's, she was embarrassed at that this turned into what it turned into, right? So you expect that, well, this is over, right? It's just a bump. You're going to get past it. And we're talking about a charge that was a misdemeanor, a false charge that was a misdemeanor. Even if I had not fought it, it would have gone off my record in 6 months. If I'd have just said, well, it's not really worth it, I'll just take the L, be convicted of this misdemeanor, and move on with my life, it would permanently be out there that I'd gotten into a fight like a teenager at the age of 48, but which would be embarrassing too, because who doesn't grow out of that by the time they're an adult? I know a lot of people don't, but not in the environment where I work, but I can't imagine, like, that was for a misdemeanor. That was for something that in some places is fairly normal behavior. If we'd have been in a bar, if I'd have been a bartender or like wait staff at a bar and grill or something, and that had happened, it wouldn't have been as weird, right? But a felony, like rape, imagine having something like that follow you around, where people think that you did something that you didn't do, and they're not just looking at you as somebody who might have a temper and go off and cause another fight, right? They're looking at you as a sexual predator, and people treat sexual predators like they're some kind of monster. This person's going to eat me alive. Mm-hmm. Like, that would be horrible. And at the other end of it, there's people that will treat you like pond scum, like, or a disease. So what men go through, when he talked about the psychological effects, what men go through when they've experienced something like this, a false allegation is not a minor experience. It's not some little blip in your life that every so often you get reminded that this inconvenient and upsetting thing happened to you, and it's like, well, that really sucked, but now this is the way I live. Nope, it's a dark cloud that is always in your sky for the rest of your life, no matter how sunny everything else gets. That dark cloud is always there, just kind of waiting to get into your peripheral vision or put itself right in front of your face, depending on what you're doing and how you're, who you're dealing with, and how you're living and everything. And on top of that, you have, like, 7 Years in Hell guy has PTSD.
Mm-hmm.
You have post-traumatic stress from this. Even a minor allegation gives a level of post-traumatic stress. I document things that I don't have to document. And I find myself doing it rather frequently, especially if somebody has acted jumpy around me. Like, I document the shit out of that evening. And it's a habit. It's, I'm going to do it because I'm an MRA and I know how important that is anyway. But it's a habit that comes from a little bit of paranoia, that comes from that post-traumatic stress of having people think I did something bad that I wouldn't do. I wouldn't get into a fight now. Like, for one thing, I'm old. But it's, you mature out of that way of dealing with conflict. It's one thing if you're attacked and you have to defend yourself, but you mature out of attacking somebody as a means of dealing with your anger and your conflict. And I worked really hard for that when I was a teenager because I had anger management issues back then. I was on 6 different steroids. I had roid rage. So it's just, it's hard to, I don't know if I can fully get it across, but if it's that big for me, that tiny little thing happening to me, if it's that big for me, imagine how it would feel to never know that somebody isn't going to do this to you again as a person who'd been through an allegation of rape or any other egregious behavior, beating your partner, molesting a child, being a threat to children. I just recently saw Mr. Repzian did a video on his ex is putting him through a massive ordeal of malicious prosecution and vexatious litigation, and she accused him of being dangerous to children. That's just a phrase that it should never be used lightly, ever, where you say this person is dangerous to children. You better have a hell of a lot of proof if you're going to say that about a person, right? But our court system, they allow that, and they don't do anything about it. She's filed frivolous restraining orders against him, and he may be able to put a stop to the vexatious litigation if he goes the route of filing a civil case against her for it. But he won't get any. She won't be penalized for it. He won't get any money out of it. The courts don't punish women for lying about men.
Mm-mm.
So, and I feel bad for the guy because I kind of know just from seeing the men I know who have gone through this, how their lives have changed and how their psychology has changed. Like, that's going to change him too. And it's not fair because he's not developing organically as a human being. He's being put through an ordeal that's going to change him forever in ways that he probably wouldn't have sought out in a million years to change that direction. So
he's in quite a bit of a situation. I mean, I think in his situation, this ex seems to really not be very smart about the things that she was doing. So I'm pretty sure that it's gonna go in his favor. But even still, having to not only put the mental anguish aside, right, for 2 seconds if you can. Look at how much money he's got to spend to defend himself. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And what happens to the men who don't have that money to defend themselves against false allegations like that? Their
Yeah, their
lives get
whole lives
ruined.
get torn up.
Yeah.
I mean, there are men who have spent like the longest I saw on the uh, Innocence Project's website was 38 years.
Jesus.
Right? Many people in the United States of his generation, because that guy is a baby boomer. Many people of his generation worked at whatever job they did. They get their job, they would work 30 years, and they would retire. 30 years is a career. And he was in prison, wrongfully incarcerated for 38 years.
Jesus.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, that's just the idea that it's not a big deal to falsely accuse somebody. It's very easy to debunk that. Of course it's a big deal. For the person that it's done to, it can range from being a life-changing experience that is more than mildly inconvenient. Even a minor false allegation is more than mildly inconvenient. It changes your whole social life, right? A major allegation changes your employability. It dramatically changes your social life, changes your psychology. It makes you more cautious for the rest of your life. It makes you more paranoid for the rest of your life.
Absolutely.
Right? That's the least impact. The worst impact is false imprisonment.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in prison is not a place that's, just, oh, you just go in there and it's inconvenient and it's awful and you don't like being in there. No. You're in there with dangerous people who really did commit crimes. There are people who are murdered in prison. And then there's also vigilante violence, which can result from a false allegation. I would say to ask Luke Harwood, but you can't unless you have a Ouija board. And he might not answer. So, like, that's, again, exoneration, may not mean innocence. And there are people who can get away with crimes that they committed. Exoneration can happen, because of false evidence or for other reasons. You can also not be exonerated and not be found guilty, and then everybody really is in doubt of the result, right? Because if you get, quote, get off on a technicality, which people say all the time when the police are found to have violated somebody's due process rights and made it doubtful whether or not their evidence was valid. Right? No, people just assume that evidence was valid, but they didn't get to use it. Right? Or the individual was guilty, but again, they got off on a technicality. So you could be proved innocent, or you could not be proved guilty, and people will still say you're guilty. It is possible for people who are guilty to be in that situation, but it doesn't necessarily mean that any given person who is in that situation is guilty. And our society has this idea that innocent until proven guilty is only for court. So they'll treat the individual as a person who got away with a crime. And yeah, a lynch mob showing at your up at your residence is more than slightly worse than false imprisonment. It's significantly worse. You die, you don't get a chance at recourse. You can't get released from death, even in retirement age. You can't. There's nothing after that. Albert Nader Retro gave us $10 Canadian and said, I saw a segment from The Real talking about, that's REAL, talking about what if men had a 9 p.m. curfew. They were decided, Alani Love Rocks, but the comment section is full of hate. I think that maybe you meant undecided? I don't know. But the comment section is full of hate. And that doesn't surprise me. There's a lot of feminists that'll act like if men had a curfew, rape would stop happening. But since a significant chunk of sexual violence is committed by women, And feminists will even tell you that rape is mostly people that know the victim, and it happens in familiar circumstances, so it's kind of stupid to say giving anybody a 9 p.m. curfew would stop rape. And then, of course...
If men had a curfew, civilization would stop happening.
Yeah.
As
We did that.
So many times on this channel. If men, like women, like walk off the job for all kinds of demonstrations all the time, and society continues as normal. If men walked off the job for one day, society would collapse, and it would take centuries to put it back to normal, if it ever did get back to normal. And it doesn't matter when we begin that 24 hours of men walking off the job. If it's at 9 p.m.,
it goes from 9 p.m. to 9 p.m. then.
Yeah. Even if it only goes for 6 hours, if men have a curfew of 6 hours, like 6 hours, that would amount to 6 hours of men walking off the job because they have no choice. And yeah, even that would be an economic and social disaster that would take us years, if not decades, to recover from.
Yeah,
I mean,
the first
little bit
thing,
like certain other lockdowns that occurred in recent history.
The first thing that would happen would be people would find out what society without cops is really like, because there are women police officers. They're about the same percentage, I think, as women in the military. And of course, if the men in the military walked off the job for 24 hours, that would be, if that happened in one country and other countries knew about it, that 24 hours would be the target 24 hours for an attack. Because who's going to defend? In the United States, 14% of the military is female, and most of them are in, office positions where they're running a computer and telling the men what to do. that would not go well for us. But yeah, a 24-hour break. We saw in 2020 and 2021 what happens when you shut society down at night, right? And even then, essential workers, you had the men who ride around in police cars and make sure that their presence is a deterrent against crime. The men who are there if a fire happens, right? The men who are going to go into your home and get you out if your house is burning. Those men didn't get shut down. Those men still had to do their jobs. The men that keep your electricity going, the men that keep your water clean, the men that keep gas coming to your house if you got a gas line, those men didn't get time off. They were essential workers. The men on the base here in the area I live in has Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. There wasn't very much of that got shut down in comparison to the rest of the city. Those men didn't get their unemployment like everybody else did. They didn't get shut down. What they did is they shut down the grocery stores, they shut down the restaurants and stuff like that. And to this day, and I know it's only like a year or two later here, but most places aren't open late now. Places that were open all night are closing at 9 or 10 o'clock at night now. And places that are open late stay open till midnight. And this city used to be awake all night. Right? Dayton used to be awake all night, just like New York, the city that never sleeps, right? But not now. Everything has changed, and it's been that way. I had a coworker train at one of my houses that I work at, and I helped to train her, and we were talking about that. She's from New York. She's been here for 4 years, and she's like, "This place is just dead. There's so many closed businesses." That's what happens when you shut down. That's what happens when you take men off the job. Right? They don't come back. They go where there is work. Right. And it wasn't here, so we had a mass exodus from the city. And we had a bunch of places open up in smaller communities outside the city. And that's where they are now. And yeah, Wes Wolliver says, right, Patterson Air Force Base. That's where the aliens are. So I've heard. I have not seen any little green men. Just a bunch of people talking about it and stuff. I haven't seen any spaceships either. So there you go. If there's aliens, they already know I'm socially awkward and they're not talking to me. But Michael Fox gave us $20 New Zealand and said, I don't know what New Zealand dollars are, whether they're dollars or something else. I don't know what they are, but NZD, so I'm pretty sure that's New Zealand. The problem is that women are believed too readily, and toxic women know how to use the rules as a weapon. I've experienced this since I was a kid. Our society just has a blind spot for evil, manipulative women. And that is true, but it's more true now than ever. And it's I'm going to cite something weird. I like old Western television shows, right? And I was watching one, and I can't remember which. I want to say it was The Rifleman, where there was an episode where there was a husband and wife, or a brother and sister. They had their evil plans to coerce somebody over money, and the woman used her sexuality. And she leveled a false allegation, or she tried to orchestrate a false allegation, and she got caught. And the people of the town were scandalized, and she had to admit, her wrongdoing, and she was embarrassed. And this would have been made. This was black and white. It would have been made like during the 50s, maybe the early 60s. But that kind of theme in television shows. Alfred Hitchcock had one where a guy is driving his wife around after she's been a victim of rape, and she sees a guy on the street, and she's like, that's the guy that did it. So he pulls the car over, and he chases the guy into a building, and he kills him with a hammer. And then he gets back into the car with his wife and is driving down the street. She sees another man, and she's like, that's the guy that did it. And he realizes that she sees that in every man now, and she's kind of lost her mind, and he just killed somebody not knowing, that's probably an innocent guy. Yeah. And there's a bunch of different things like that. I've seen that in a lot of different old shows. There were Twilight Zone episodes of that. With that, there were I think that was in at least one Star Trek episode, but a lot of old TV shows, and there were old movies with that same theme. People have been aware of this for a long time. It's been in the last maybe 40 or 50 years that feminists have tried to make it so that we are not allowed to acknowledge that. We're not allowed to talk about it, and we're not allowed to believe that it's a possibility. We have to just believe the woman when she makes an allegation. So it's definitely, we do need to get back to a point of skepticism. Albert Nader Retro gave us $5 and said, I meant divided, and grapists wouldn't obey a curfew because they are criminals. And that is another point. If somebody really was that stereotypical evil crazy guy that's gonna hide in a dark alley and jump some woman and hurt her, that guy's not gonna care if he has a 9 o'clock curfew. He's gonna do that all night.
No. Right.
So, I mean it's kind of dumb.
Because he knows that there's no other men around to help protect all the little women, so they're all defenseless.
Yep. So there's that. So, and of course, that 9 o'clock curfew thing is in and of itself a false allegation, too, because it's the allegation that rape is a male behavior and that all men are somehow connected to it, when in fact it's a highly abnormal behavior, that a small percentage of the population behaves that way, whether male or female, and most people have no connection to it. It's psychologically, where you can't understand the thought process and attitudes behind it, because it's not within you, right? So it's really stupid to make that argument, but women do it anyway. So yeah, how would we handle, the idea of exoneration and guilt and conviction and guilt and innocence and all that? How do we handle that as a society? We should be treating the right to be presumed innocent until proven guilty as a human right all the time, not just in court, but in your social situations, everywhere. And unfortunately, we can't do that because people get paranoid, and people like to judge, and people like to cancel.
Yep.
Susan Brown Miller's 1975 book, Against Our Will, Men, Women, and Rape, claimed that just 2% of rape complaints were false. For decades thereafter, various sources seemed to confirm that figure, but Edward Greer, 2000, traced their sources back to Brown Miller. Brown Miller's source was a speech by Judge Lawrence Cook on 16 January 1974, in which he said, according to the commissioner of New York City's Rape Analysis Squad, only about 2% of all rape and related sex charges are determined to be false. Of any evidence of data, reporting, or other provenance behind that claim, there is none. So there's nothing to back it. It's just completely unverified.
God, why does that not surprise me at all?
and that's like the first thing that gets thrown at us. We start talking about the importance of due process, the right to present exculpatory evidence in court, the fact that, if you got a good lawyer, if you're an accuser and your prosecuting attorney is good at his job, he should be able to argue to a jury for what is right. So if it's right that your history with the accused doesn't imply consent, he should be able to make valid arguments that will convince a jury that any claims the defense makes in regard to that history are fallacious. Right? That's how arguments should be done in court. You shouldn't be able to tell the defense, no, you can't use that as an argument. No, you can't submit that evidence. No, you can't say that in court. Yes, you should be able to say it. The prosecutor should just have the skill and capability to say, well, here's why that's wrong, if it is wrong. And if he can't do that, maybe it's because it's not wrong.
Mm-hmm.
However, in the sorry tale of misinformation on this topic, it is the Crown Prosecution Service, that's UK, who take the ignominious prize. Their 2013 report, co-authored by Alison Levitt, QC, carried a foreword by Keir Starmer, who was the then Director of Public Prosecutions, Levitt 2013. It is an example of what I call constructive mendacity, by which I mean there is no sentence which is an undisputable untruth, but the whole construction is designed to grossly mislead. And I like that, constructive mendacity. Feminists do that all the time. Almost all of feminism's claims, almost all of their dogma, almost all of their rhetoric relies on constructive mendacity.
Mm-hmm.
The rest is just flat out lies. Starmer wrote, one such misplaced belief is that false allegations of rape and domestic violence are rife. This report presents a more accurate picture. But it does not. The report did not even address those thorny issues. Instead, it merely looked at the rate of prosecutions for false allegations. So, imagine if we did that with rape. Well, rape is incredibly rare. Look, only 3% of allegations are prosecuted. I don't know if that's the percentage, but it's tiny, right? Most allegations don't come with evidence, so they don't. You can't prosecute without evidence.
Right.
So, if we decided that most rape didn't happen, most allegations are proven false because there's no prosecution, then we could say rape is exceedingly rare. And if it's exceedingly rare, is it not a problem? Like, maybe we should just ignore it. Like, feminists say we should ignore false allegations because feminists claim they're exceedingly rare. So the report didn't actually look at the rate of false allegations, but it gave the impression that it had addressed the harder question by stating the review has allowed us to examine the suggestion that false allegations of rape and or domestic violence are rife. The report found 0.62% of prosecutions for rape resulted in a prosecution for a false allegation. But no one ever disputed that the rate of prosecutions for false allegations was very low. It is beyond credibility that lawyers would fail to appreciate the difference between the underlying false allegation rate and the rate of prosecution for false allegation. Hence my claim of constructive mendacity. And again, like, we look at the rate of rape allegations versus the rate of prosecution. If we failed to appreciate the difference and said that the prosecution rate was the rate of rape, that would piss feminists off immensely. And in fact, Mary Koss's entire research career is based on trying to eliminate that angle of looking at the crime.
Mm-hmm.
But ever since, people have been quoting the CPS report as its Crown prosecution for Americans for whom CPS means Child Protective Services, as demonstrating the rate of false allegations is only 0.62%. So there you go. We now have feminists making an even lower claim. Evidence on the rate of false rape allegations has been compiled by Rumney, 2006, and by Lissac et al., 2010, and their sources are based on police reports, and so all refer to percentages of allegations made to the police. Let me just flat-footedly give you the false allegation rates from 19 sources, which Rumney quotes in his table. So we have this list here, right? It starts out at 1.5%. 1.5% to 10%, which is like a range from one research paper. 2%, 3% to 22%, a range from another paper. 3% to 31% from another paper. 38%, we're getting up there. 8%, 10.3%, 10.9% to 25% from another paper. 11%, 11.8%, 18.2% from one paper, 20%, 22.4%, 24%, 38%, 41%, that's there twice, 45%, 47%, and 90%. 90%.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, it's quite a margin of error there between 1.5% and 90%.
Yeah. I think someone needs to go back to math class and learn how to count all over again.
Yeah, or it would be interesting to see the paper that found 90%. I wonder what their standards were and what they... Because it's... When I look at it this way. You know, you take the percentage of cases that are exonerated, or that are, the evidence doesn't prove guilt. So where there's no conviction, right? And you apply that to the number of cases that are never tried, that just like that undecided middle. Is when feminists make their claims that most rape isn't even prosecuted and most rapists are never convicted, they take the bulk of statistics from certain surveys. So allegations that were never made to police, allegations that were only listed in a survey, and some of them use the crime victim survey, Some of them use the National Intimate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey. The numbers are going to differ there too, right? But when they look at that, they presume all of the allegations that are not conclusively proved false to be true allegations. And then they take the percentage of those overall allegations and say, well, only this percentage of rapists ever gets convicted. But they don't know that, because they don't know that the percentage of cases that are tried and not convicted, found not guilty, right, for whatever reason, that doesn't also apply to that bulk, that undecided middle of cases that are unknown, cases that were never reported to police, cases that were reported but never brought to trial, and so on. What percentage of those cases is a false allegation? What percentage of those cases could be proved false if the case was investigated? And we don't know, because there aren't repercussions when that happens, right? And we also don't know how many people lied on those self-reports. So,
in short, in a nutshell, let's say you had a bowl of M&Ms.
Yeah.
and you were told that if you eat any of these given M&Ms, the chance of it being poisonous and you dying from the poison is between 1.5 and 90%. You'd be like, who are you? Why did I ask you this? You've given me, like, almost literally no helpful information. Please piss off.
And take your M&Ms with you.
Yeah.
Like, I'm gonna go get some better chocolate. Oh my gosh, yeah. Albert Nader Retro gave us $10 Canadian and said, Dr. Randomer Cam, they'd have something passes. York passes. So Chippendales will still be open. And probably work passes. And they can assault the male strippers. Unfortunately, there'll be nobody to buy drinks on ladies' night. So, yeah, there you go.
Yeah, point taken.
Yeah.
Why is ladies' night a thing is a subject for a whole other show.
Yeah. And the answer is women are bait. Women are bait. There we go. So he goes on, you take my point, anywhere between 1.5% and 90% is not very helpful. The main reason for the huge spread is the criterion used to define false. Broadly, there are two. A, categorize an allegation as false only if a thorough investigation based on evidence has established that no crime was committed or attempted. Or B, a range of less certain criteria, including the police recording the allegation as a no crime, but without clear evidence behind that decision. And, in my view, it's really difficult to nail this down, because I'm sure feminists will have arguments as to why it must require, in order to label an allegation false, evidence that it is false must be required. In other words, evidence of innocence as opposed to a lack of evidence of guilt. Mm-hmm. And if we're going to solve that, there should be three categories. There should be the category of proven guilty, the category of unproven allegations that are not proven false or true, and the category of proven false. And I think the biggest category is on unproven allegations. And there's many reasons why an allegation might fall into that category. For instance, say before DNA testing, you had Jenny has a party, right? Jenny's party is wild. Jenny gets drunk. Jenny passes out on the couch right next to her friend Edward, who is just sitting there on the couch with his beer doing nothing. Just enjoying the party, maybe talking to somebody. But he's there, and she knows he's there. And sometime after Jenny passes out, Edward leaves. He's like, maybe he doesn't feel good. Drank too much beer, goes home, right? Jenny wakes up the next morning with a sticky substance all over herself, and her clothes are disheveled. She goes in for a rape kit, files a police report. She remembers that Edward was sitting next to her on the couch, and she tells the police his name. Not Edward raped me, but Edward was right there. He's the only guy I know that was on that couch with me that night. Right? Now, Jenny didn't lie about anything. She didn't falsely state anything. She wasn't malicious, right? But let's say the rape kit comes back, that was somebody's pina colada. Jenny was not sexually assaulted at all. Edward didn't do anything wrong, right? That's a proven false allegation, but it's not a proven lie. She didn't mean to falsely accuse Edward. She wasn't malicious. From Edward's perspective, that's false allegation, right? Before DNA testing, maybe they don't have that. They just have this substance. Maybe they can't prove what it is. Maybe they can't prove that it's bodily fluid. Maybe it's somebody else's bodily fluid. Edward needs some sort of evidence to prove that he did nothing. And, maybe they don't convict him. Maybe they don't acquit him. For the rest of his life, Edward's suspected to be a rapist, and Jenny's suspected to be a rape victim for the rest of hers. Right? And maybe she was, maybe she wasn't. Right? Those are areas where you can't necessarily prove somebody's innocence. You can't necessarily prove somebody's guilt. And it might not even be malicious. One of the bits of research that had a 25% exoneration rate, I believe this was 1984, the FBI did DNA testing. It might have been later. It had to be later because I don't think there was DNA testing in 1984. But there's a piece of research from the FBI where they did DNA testing on a bunch of cases where the convicts had declared their innocence, and DNA testing was not available during their hearings, during their investigations. And 25% of them were exonerated by the DNA testing. And there was a lot of discussion about this at the time that it was published. This doesn't necessarily mean that they were falsely accused. Well, yes, it does. From their perspective, they were falsely accused. What it doesn't mean is that the accuser knew that they were pointing the finger at the wrong guy. Sometimes you have instances where the victim is passed out. Sometimes you have instances where the victim is panicked and can't remember anything. Sometimes you have instances where the victim was too young to give a good identification, or was blindfolded, or had other reasons why they could not identify the perpetrator. And sometimes they mistake one person for another. Especially in a lineup, especially if it was a stranger. So, there's that. And unfortunately, we have this panic over this particular type of crime that is way beyond the scope of the damage that the crime does. So, as Jen Bottle pointed out, we have a standard in our society: better hang the wrong man than no man. And unfortunately, that standard does get applied here, where it really should not. The advantage of criterion A, that being categorizing an allegation as false only if a thorough investigation based on evidence has established that no crime was committed or attempted, is that it would establish a firm lower bound to the rate of false allegations. So we know that at least that many allegations are false. The disadvantage is that the lower bound may be far smaller than the true rate, because the police do not usually concentrate on performing a thorough investigation to prove that a crime did not occur. They would, though, if it became a prosecutable offense to knowingly and willfully falsely accuse someone, which it should be. It's, in the United States at least, it is against the law to file a false police report, to lie to the police during an investigation, to file a false complaint, on which a false charge will be based, and to perjure yourself in court. So these are things that are offenses that normally are prosecutable. If I say, if I claim to have had jewelry that was worth money, which I don't even wear jewelry, right? So that's not going to happen. But if I claim I had a diamond necklace, and I claim that my diamond necklace was in a location in my apartment, and I claim that somebody broke into my apartment and stole it, and I claim on my insurance that I want reimbursed for that, and it turns out to be provable that I never had a diamond necklace, or that I still have the diamond necklace I claim was stolen, that's considered fraud. And if I have committed those crimes in the process of trying to defraud my insurance company, I can be prosecuted for those crimes. If I lie to the police, say if somebody stole my necklace, I can be prosecuted for telling the police that somebody stole a necklace that I still have or that I never had. Right? I can be prosecuted for putting it on paper, filing a false complaint about the necklace. And I can be prosecuted if I go to court and testify that this happened when it didn't. And that's correct. That's right and good, because the prosecutor is acting, he's not acting on my behalf when he goes to court. He's acting on the behalf of the public against criminals who would try to steal stuff. They basically against criminals that would try to commit a crime against the public. So it's intended to be a deterrent, right? So my neighbor has the right to not pay taxes for the prosecuting attorney to then prosecute someone falsely for stealing a necklace that I never had or still have. My neighbor has the right to know that his tax dollars are not going to be abused in that manner. And he also has the right to know that I'm not going to say he stole my necklace when he didn't. And so those rights are protected by the outlawing of lying to the police like that. But if I accuse my neighbor of breaking into my apartment and sexually assaulting me, and I lie about all that, then local women's advocacy groups will strong-arm the local police department and the local prosecutor into shutting up about it and not doing anything about any process crimes that I commit in the course of lying about my neighbor and trying to get him convicted of a sex crime he didn't commit because I'm a woman. And that works because our society has a gynocentric attitude that has gone well beyond its original standard. Like, we have there's actually a big argument going on about this, I think, on Twitter. Unless it's, I don't know, I'm not really doing anything on Twitter in the last few weeks. I don't know, maybe it petered out. But it was pretty heated the last time I was actually able to be on. I don't think that our gynocentric attitude in society, like straight up gynocentrism, where it's favoring the woman just because she's female, I don't think that's an instinct. And I don't think it's natural. I think it stems from our protection of the golden uterus. To quote Dr. Tara Pamatier, we prioritize women because we prioritize women's reproductive capacity and women's nurturing motherhood. And as a result of that, women have been able to take advantage of that attitude, which is really more of a gene-centrism. We're protecting the next generation. Women have been able to take advantage of that attitude and parlay that into, because I'm a woman, you have to treat me better. Because I'm a woman, you have to believe me. Because I'm a woman, you have to give up your rights for my safety net. And I don't think that's natural. Protecting children is natural. And prioritizing children's welfare is natural. And it isn't unnatural for that to have the side effect of benefits to women. But it is unnatural for when children are taken out of the equation, those benefits to continue, as if women are just special because they're women. And that's where we're at now with that. I think that is that is creating a situation of people being willing to accept that we have to believe women because they're women, and that we have to accept throwing men's due process rights under the bus because a woman somewhere might get hurt if we don't. It's like the instinct to preserve your life is an instinct. It's a natural occurrence. You have to do that, or you if you don't have a sense of self-preservation, you die. You don't preserve yourself. You don't prevent yourself from taking risks, right? And as part of that, the instinct to consume nutrition is natural, and I would call that a genetic thing. You die without having an instinctive desire to eat. But what you choose to eat and how you choose to eat it and how you plan your diet and all that, that is cultural. And there are some things that are deeply ingrained in our culture. Some people, like, pun intended, because, for instance, some people just don't feel like they've been fed properly if they don't have bread with every meal.
Yeah.
Like something is wrong if you don't have bread with every meal. And that goes back through culture, right? Some people can't stand certain foods that other people, it's normal for them to eat. That's cultural. I would say gene-centrism or child-centrism is a natural instinct, but pure gynocentrism for its own sake is cultural. It's a cultural outcropping of a natural instinct, and we can overcome it and overcome this vulnerability to feminism's constructive mendacity on this point. So he goes on, the veracity of the estimates resulting from criteria B will depend on the exact procedure. It might give an accurate estimate, or it might sometimes be a serious overestimate or underestimate. Some of Rumney's sources claimed that the police had used a no-crime criterion, which required the complainant to have admitted there was no crime, but doubt was expressed that the police had truly applied this criterion consistently. There's also suspicion in many cases that police may have been rather too ready to no-crime reports. In the worst cases, and noting that sources go back as far as the 1970s, the reasons for assigning as a no-crime might have been disconcertingly antediluvian, as in no sign of a struggle, etc. And that's the other thing. Some of this research that's older gets thrown out by feminists because they have worked very hard to change standards in regard to rape. When Gen X were kids, and movies like The Accused came out and stuff like that, the standard was very different. Mens rea was recognized as important. Guilty mind. The idea that the intention of the accused mattered. Right? That changed when feminists changed our standard for prosecution from the accused being accused of trying to contravene the accuser's right or ability to refuse sexual content or contact, to the accused failing to obtain consent. One is the earlier would be the accused being accused of deliberately overriding the will, like against our will, as Susan Brown Miller's title says, of the victim, of the accused victim, the alleged victim, right? But the latter can be an accident. The accused fails to obtain consent. Can be a thing that happens in the heat of the moment, when both parties appear to be participating, if the accused isn't savvy to the subtle signs that some women make of being uncomfortable, unhappy, not wanting to do something, but still participating in it. That's the feminist allegation. So now you have the ability to treat someone like a monster after accusing them of accidentally raping someone. And under standards that are used by the court system, this gets treated as valid. So now allegations are treated as true if the accused took active participation in a sex act as a sign of consent and didn't receive verbal consent. And the accuser can say, well, yes, but I was intimidated. Or, I was under his thrall.
Mm-hmm.
which we've decided hangs down in a little protective sack from the groin. So there you go. But yeah, so the criteria, it's difficult with the latter criteria because that's broad enough that it can label allegations true that are actually really questionable at best. And it can also label allegations false that should have resulted in a conviction. The whole claim of how was she dressed is one that feminists will throw out in regard to that. It's a much smaller thing than they actually make it out to be. But most of the time when the police want to know what you were wearing, it's because they want to search your clothes and see if they can find evidence like hair, bodily fluids, and stuff like that might help them convict the accused. But feminists treat it like, well, if you were wearing something sexy, they're going to assume that you wanted the assault. Lissac, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right. It might be Lissac. At all, concentrated upon criterion A and found a false rate of sexual assault on this basis to be 5.9%. They also found 7 other sources whose data could be analyzed in this way and gave these results. 2.1%, 2.5%, 3%, 6.8%, 8.3%, 10.3%, and 10.9%. They concluded that the prevalence of false allegations is between 2 and 10%. But this is incorrect, and the references of the publication were amiss in letting that conclusion go through. These figures are all lower bounds. If they were all applicable to the same population, an issue I have avoided discussing, then 10.9% would be the final lower bound, which still might be far lower than the correct value. So, again, like feminists, and Lissac, by the way, is the guy who did the research that on which the claim of an epidemic of serial rape on university campuses was made. Like, he claimed that the majority of rapists were serial rapists and that university campuses were rife with it. But his actual sample of survey respondents were all well older, or mostly well older than university age. They were just people, they were just men who were part of the general population outside of university campuses who had been, I think, arrested for rape or arrested for sexual misconduct. And what it found actually was that the majority of those that were guilty, that admitted guilt, like about 90, I think it was 94% of those that admitted guilt were single instance perpetrators. And of the rest, like 6% committed most of the rapes, like over half of the rapes that they admitted to committing. And of that 6%, they also admitted to being violent in other ways, criminally violent in other ways, committing robberies, burglaries, and things like that. So if there was anything to be taken from that research, it is that among sexual violence perpetrators, the majority of sexual violence is perpetrated by a minority of that population, an even smaller minority of the general population. And that tiny minority, that's, again, a violent minority that has issues. They're not normal thinking men that go out and have a normal job and support their families and do normal things with their lives. They're men with very serious issues of criminal violence and probably need psychological treatment, right? But that's not what he released. That's not the conclusion he released. So his research is he does this. This seems to be a habitual thing, like the citing the lower number and the top number as the full range, the full bounds of false allegations, when in fact the top number is actually the lower bound. Like, that's not out of the realm of his normal behavior. A Ministry of Justice report, MOJ, that would be in the UK, MOJ 2010, states that various studies have estimated that 8 to 11% of rape allegations in England and Wales are false. But it notes that a lack of a consistent definition of what constitutes a false rape allegation, as well as variations in recording practices by police and others in the CJS, make accurate assessment of the true extent of such allegations very difficult. So again, they have this number that they've tossed out, and it goes as high as 11% now, as the lower bound. So anything less than 11 is suspect. And even they say, this could be inaccurate. It could be more. To drive home how... Oh, go on.
I was just going to say, and hovering around 10%, it just doesn't feel right, I understand that they're saying that this is the lower bound, but God, it feels wrong. It feels like it should be more than that, but
and with it being the lower bound, it behooves us to remember where some of the upper bounds are. And I actually have a infographic, which I don't like calling it a meme because it's not something that people are aware enough of. It's not a commonly thought of enough thing to be a meme, but feminists like to call it a meme as a means of discrediting it. But I did the math after reading an article in the Hindi in regard to investigation into a series of allegations made in Delhi, and it was 6 months worth of allegations that they looked at, and they found the lower bound of false allegation. The lower bound of the rate of false allegations from that research was 65%. That's the lower bound. The upper bound was 85%. So for that time period in Delhi, the false allegation rate was somewhere between 65% and 85%. And that, so there's different things that can affect that, right? In Delhi, part of the reason that was so high was because if a couple was in love and decided to get married against the wishes of their parents, the parents of the wife might accuse the husband of kidnapping and raping their daughter, and the police would have to sort that out. So that's a false allegation. Also, if a couple had sex and the woman expected to get married, and the guy decides, I'm not going to be your husband, we're not going to get married, she would consider that breach of promise to marry, and she would go and tell the police that he had raped her, and they had to sort that out. So those two things contributed to that.
Yeah.
Where, like, in the United States, I don't think there's very many women who would follow breach of promise to marry with a rape allegation that they would expect the police to take seriously. He promised to marry me, so I had sex with him, and then he didn't. It was a lie. That's rape. You know, like, women in the United States know that the cops don't consider that to be rape. Unless the couple is underage, I don't think you're going to see, or at least the girl is underage, I don't think you're going to see very many parents making the allegation that their daughter, who eloped against their will, has been kidnapped and that the marital sex is rape. And then find out that from the police that no, that doesn't count as the crime of rape. But even with that, their allegation rate, a minimum of 65%, is pretty darn high.
Yeah.
So Lisek classified the data into false report based on criterion A, did not proceed, and did proceed. Insufficient information. Out of 136 cases, there were 8, 61, 48, and 19 in these categories, respectively. So 8 were labeled a false report based on criterion A, meaning they were proven false. 61 did not proceed. 48 did proceed, and 19 had insufficient information. Any of the 128 cases which did not meet criterion A might have been a false allegation, but just wasn't proved to be. Suspicion alights particularly on the 61 cases, 45% classified as did not proceed. Quote, this classification was applied if the report of a sexual assault did not result in a referral for prosecution or disciplinary action because of insufficient evidence, or because the victim withdrew from the process, or was unable to identify the perpetrator, or because the victim mislabeled the incident, for example, gave a truthful account of the incident, but the incident did not meet the legal elements of the crime of sexual assault. So, I don't know about the UK, but in the US, there are women who think that if a guy lies to them to get them to be more receptive, pretends to have money he doesn't have, that's a big one, or pretends to be single when he's not, things like that. And then they have sex with him, and it turns out he's not single, or he actually is broke. That he's used deception, and that makes it rape, and that's not rape. There are some girls who think if they have a beer, they can't consent, and so they think that's rape. You actually have to be too drunk to appraise your actions for it to meet the standard, the legal standard in most places in the United States. So having one beer, unless you're 4'11" and weigh 80 pounds soaking wet and have the metabolism from hell, and you get drunk on one beer, like falling down drunk on one beer, it doesn't eliminate your ability to consent.
Yeah.
They're being taught that in college now, by the way, when they take consent classes in college. Any alcohol at all, the presence of any alcohol, you should assume the other person can't consent.
That's just insane. So I don't know if you probably know, because you know things like this, but there's a medical condition where everything you eat turns into alcohol in your system.
Yeah. I don't know the name of the condition, but I do know of its existence. And people can go a pretty good portion of their lives and not realize they have that condition, and that's why they're constantly sleepy and feel, or they can develop that condition where they don't have it during their childhood and they don't have it during most of their adulthood, but then all of a sudden they're having this problem. And there have been people that have been...
They develop tolerance, like anyone develops tolerance to any other drug, especially if it's a drug that forms in your digestive system every time you ingest carbohydrates. And so they just live their whole lives drunk, but they get used to being drunk, so they don't know they're drunk until they get randomly pulled over and they breathe 1.2 or whatever it is on the breathalyzer, and then some huge big old investigation has to be brought in. But again, this is a very, very rare case.
Yeah,
it is a very rare condition.
It's an extremely uncommon
and
condition.
It is good that it's
you
rare.
have to wonder what happens if two students fuck each other on fentanyl. Is there who's responsible for that? Is it the fucking Minnesota police? Or,
it's the one that doesn't OD first.
Yeah. Well, the really rough thing is, that kind of condition, you wouldn't know you had it because it's your normal, right? You wouldn't know you had it. You can get busted for drunk driving for it. I mean, you could also falsely accuse someone. The other thing is, that would be awful for your liver. Yeah. Like, imagine your liver to have to constantly be processing alcohol your whole life. And you'd be like having, being constantly tipsy.
Imagine that.
But of course, it's probably not that much worse than people who are on prescription non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. In fact, those are harder on your liver than alcohol. And they cause serious problems. They're also hard on your kidneys, so 6 to 1, half dozen the other. But in any case, there's a lot of factors that can make it illegitimate to claim that a woman just couldn't consent, but a man is responsible. And I would go back to and I partly go back to this case because when he came home to the Dayton metro area, and there was an armed protest here, and that was the Brock Turner case, where both Turner and the accuser were at the same level of intoxication in terms of their ability to appraise their actions. And when the case gets discussed, it gets discussed like this guy just grabbed this chick and ravaged her, and people are defending him for it. They were walking together back to his dorm room from a party. And by the way, this is not a naive little college co-ed that, was in her first year or anything. This is a girl who was older than the college students. Turner was 19. I think she was like 22. So they were on their way back to his room, presumably to study biology, obviously.
But to actually check out their etchings.
Yes, the etchings. They're definitely not for any sexually illicit purposes, because nobody does that. Goes from a party back to a guy's dorm room to do the horizontal bop or anything like that. That's abnormal. College students never do that, right? And they both started making out in this alley where they were caught, and they fell down because they were drunk. They were both falling down drunk, and he was so drunk that he didn't notice that in the middle of continuing the act, she passed out. That was why he got convicted. And he didn't get convicted of rape. He got convicted of a sexual assault crime that was a lesser crime than rape. And the judge agreed with him that he believed he had consent, that he had obtained verbal consent. And that's why his sentence was only 3 months, or 6 months. And he got out in 3 months because he exhibited exemplary behavior as a prisoner, which is the whole point of exemplary behavior as a prisoner, that you get rewarded by being let out early. So when people get upset about this case, and they got so upset that they showed up in a residential neighborhood in the Dayton metro area with firearms powerful enough to shoot through brick and mortar, in a neighborhood where there were old people and children who had absolutely nothing to do with the case, and patrolled in front of this guy's house until police made them leave. They got a judge unseated. They got him removed from his seat because they were mad that this guy in this gray situation wasn't treated like the stereotypical scary creep in a dark alley jumping women because he's evil. That's the situation. So it's important to look at this criteria. We're looking at a difference here in, is there not enough evidence? Is the evidence in favor of the accused? Did the accuser change her mind about the accusation? All of these things contribute to, are we looking at a false allegation? Are we looking at an allegation that was maybe gray, maybe the situation can't really be determined? Or are we looking at a black and white situation where, yes, there was definitely a sex crime committed? Right? This classification was applied if the report of sexual assault did not result in a referral for prosecution. So that 45% was just no prosecution or disciplinary action because of insufficient evidence, or because the victim withdrew from the process and was unable to identify the perpetrator, because the victim mislabeled the incident, said it was rape when it wasn't rape, and so on. A priori, any of the 45% of the cases in this category might be a false allegation. Right? Clearly, one cannot conclude otherwise when this categorization included cases where there was insufficient evidence or the victim withdrew. This will be quite typical of studies based on criterion A. We are thrown.
I'd like to thank him for putting the word victim in scare quotes.
Yeah, that's something else. We see the word victim thrown around in feminist research like anybody who makes an allegation must be a victim. Mm-hmm. Right? So the, quote, victim that made the allegation in 7 Years in Hell case was allegedly raped by 7 Years in Hell guy from across town while he was in line at a pharmacy. He's very magical. He's got, like the magic bullet, but it's a dick. It goes around corners and it's invisible until it gets to the location where it's supposed to commit the crime, right? What else did she do? She was waved at menacingly. I'll never forget this allegation. Menacingly. Like you waved menacingly with
his dick?
Yeah. We never did find that out. She was waved at menacingly at a bar in Dayton by the 7 Years in Hell guy while he was at McDonald's, and she was in, I think, Arizona. So he also has a magic hand. And she was assaulted at a bus stop by a 7 Years in Hell guy. She was assaulted at a bus stop by 7 Years in Hell guy and kicked him in the balls 3 times, after which he ran away at top speed, because normal guys can do that after getting kicked in the balls 3 times, while he was on his couch at home, drugged out of his mind, recovering from hernia surgery.
Oh my god.
Yeah. Like, those false allegations can be blatant and obvious like that, and it's very useful for the accused when they are. The best one out of the three had to be that one. Because hasn't everybody kicked a guy in the balls 3 times hard and then watched him run immediately afterward?
In every movie I've ever watched, yes.
Yes, they get up and run. Like, jeez. You know, like, false accusers are stupid people very often. Like, they really don't think their stories out very well, you know. So we are thrown back on the brute fact that for the large bulk of cases, we do not know if the allegation was false or not. But there's another approach to the question. I have not attempted to discuss how the false allegation rate might depend on population, country, demographic. You know, though the pursuit of a single global figure is obviously a fool's errand. However, there is another issue. The false allegation rate may not be static, but might have varied substantially. In the UK, at least, I suspect it has. Here I bring up to date an argument presented in Collins 2019, and then critique it myself and invite others to do so too. There are 3 numerical ingredients to the arguments as follows. 1, the estimate of the true number of women victims of rape on the Crime Survey for England and Wales, CSEW, which is like the Crime Victims Survey in the United States, for which I use CSEW 2020. The CSEW reported percentage of women victims of rape who report to police, CSEW 2021, and the number of police recorded crimes of rape of women, Crime Data 2022. So basically, the one is a survey that is done in which people answer questions that are based on the literal crime definitions and descriptions. Like, if it's the same, and I'm pretty sure it is the same as the crime victim survey that the Justice Department does, they do it in a similar manner to the NISVS, but instead of using Mary Koss's deceptive question method, if they ask about the crime of rape, they either ask using the label rape or they ask using a description that meets the criteria for the crime of rape. Not, did you ever have sex with a man because he gave you alcohol? Which is like what Mary Koss asks and what NISVS is based on.
That would mean that every woman in a nightclub has gotten raped.
The actual question is, have you ever had sex when you didn't want to because a man gave you alcohol? And that was the original way it was written. And I have known people who would give someone a blowjob to get a beer. So, like, that's prostitution. It's not rape.
That's an interesting question. Have you ever drunk alcohol when you didn't want to? And the answer would be a really fuzzy sort of grey area.
Yeah.
Where you're like, yes, I guess, because what do you mean by want? Sometimes I drink because I feel like I need to.
Yeah. And
how are you supposed to differentiate that to a lawyer, let alone a judge? Yeah. Want really shouldn't be. Well, should it be a legal term? There shouldn't be so much hanging on such a subjective term. Like, consent is the kind of term we use for this. Want is just this fluffy bullshit because you don't know. Nobody knows what they want, really.
Yeah.
This is why we have more specific terms like consent.
You know, I can actually say I have had alcohol when I didn't drink it because I wanted it. If you have a chest infection and you don't want to drug yourself with NyQuil, one of the things that can soothe a cough and help you sleep is a hot toddy. But I've consumed those when I've been so tired that I just wanted to lay down and go to sleep. But I knew if I didn't drink something, I would wake up an hour later, coughing my ass off, and I wouldn't get any sleep. So I've drank alcohol when I didn't want to, actually. And I'm sure there have been people that have had sex on impulse where it was like, I've just got this itch, I've got a scratch. I'm going to find my friend with benefits and just take it out. And of course, if you ask that person, did you ever have sex when you didn't want to? They might be like, well, you know, I had sex just to have sex. It wasn't really a desire. They might answer that question that way. You know, and a woman who basically traded pussy for alcohol would answer it that way too. And again, that's not rape, that's prostitution.
It's an interesting question. Have you ever paid taxes when you didn't want to?
Yep.
I'll leave that hanging where it needs to hang.
Sometimes twice. Actually. Yep. So basically, the crime survey is slightly more accurate in that at least people know what they're answering. They know they are saying they were raped. They know they are saying they were burglarized. They know they are saying they were a victim of violent crime when they answer those questions. And it's not the cost one, right? And then the reported percentage of women victims who report to police. So they answer the survey. The first question is, did this ever happen to you? The second question is, did you file a police report? So they get a difference between the number of people who experienced the crime by definition and the number of people who went and reported it to police after it happened. And that, like, people think, well, how could you experience a crime and not report it to police?
Yeah.
So, in my family, I've had, I've barely talked about, I had a cousin who died of fentanyl poisoning. And I had an uncle who lived for 50 or 60 years with addiction problems. And my mom had chronic pain, severe chronic pain. And my uncle also had severe chronic pain. And because he was an addict, he was treated like any effort he made at pain management at all was seeking to feed his addiction.
Yeah.
So he got desperate, and he stole my mom's pain medicine once. You can damn well bet that did not get reported to the police.
Yeah.
We handled that as a family. It wasn't something that came out well. Like, addiction is a really complicated illness, and it's even more complicated when it exists in conjunction with severe chronic pain. And I'm not talking about minor pain. My uncle had peritonitis from a sponge that was left in his gut following an appendix surgery. And they had to take his entire stomach. They took part of his, every single organ in his gut. And
Jesus.
his chronic pain in his gut for the rest of his life was similar to getting punched in the gut. So it wasn't minor pain.
I don't understand. If you take someone's entire stomach and gut, what's even left over?
He had his small intestine attached directly to his esophagus. Meals consisted of a couple of spoonfuls of food. They took out some of the intestine, the small intestine, some of the large intestine, some of the colon. They had to take off even a little bit. I don't think he had a gallbladder anymore. Like, he really was messed up. His health was really bad. He was diabetic. He had ceramic bones in his feet. He is also the uncle whose arm got caught in a rubber press. And this was a horrific accident. This crushed his hand and his arm bones down to about half an inch thick.
Oh my God.
And then they had to roll it back out.
Oh.
So it popped the ends of his fingers like balloons. Like, it just destroyed his arm. And doctors convinced him to do an experimental procedure to save it. And they put metal in place of the bones. And it didn't work. So his arm was pretty useless. And it was in pain all the time. And when it got cold, his metal bones got cold. And it was just like... And they didn't monitor his pain treatment. So when he was on pain medication, they didn't prevent him from becoming addicted to morphine. In that, like, he already had some tendency and some weakness toward that, and it kind of runs in the family, but this just, like, took away all of his chance at not being an addict. And it just, his whole life he struggled with that. And his whole life he struggled with pain. So when I say he stole some of my mother's pain medicine, I'm not talking about some malicious, not caring how she felt. This was an act of desperation.
Yeah.
Right? And our whole family struggled with this situation. There's nothing black and white about this, right? When I was a little kid, I can still remember the same uncle carrying me around when I had a cold, and joking around about pictures in our house, and giving me a silly nickname to make me laugh and stuff. And like, that's how I remember him. I remember him as that guy. I remember him as the guy who carried my mom into the hospital when she had pneumonia. And that's what I hold on to, because that's who he was on the inside. And every time, every time his inner demons got one over on his better angels, we all knew that was his struggle, and managing that was his struggle and our struggle, right? A lot of these situations, this is you talk about crime and the commission of crime and the commission of violent crime. I think most of the people that are involved in criminal activities, whether it's to do with drug addiction, whether it's to do with burglary, robbery, sexual violence, all of it, have some kind of struggle like that. That they have their better angels and they have their inner demons, and when their inner demons get their better angels, they commit a crime. They do something like that. And in a lot of families, people are aware of that. This uncle, that aunt, this cousin, that brother, this sister, mom, dad, is an alcoholic, has a gambling problem, was molested as a child, and beaten, was raised in an abusive household themselves, or whatever. And now sometimes they do this, and you'll manage it. And so a lot of crimes don't get reported to police. Oh, this jewelry went missing. Well, before you call the police, make sure cousin Julie didn't take it.
Yeah.
And just stuff like that. And there are many sicknesses. Some people set fires out of sickness. And our society doesn't handle sickness like that as a handicap that our society could band together, that our neighbors, our friends, the people who know the individual, and the people who have the education to assist the individual can band together to help them overcome, help them manage, or help them contain. They treat it as, this person is a monster who deserves to be punished.
Yeah.
And it makes me sick when I look at the prison system and I look at what we have in the prison system, the stuff that we've talked about in the last couple of weeks, because every person in every cell in that system has a backstory that involves some kind of mental sickness.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
and again, that's why a lot of crime doesn't get reported to police, because when it happens within families or among friends and people are aware of those sicknesses, they feel compassion for the perpetrator and they don't report. Another reason is, let's say my uncle stole from one of his friends, but when he did it during the commission of another crime. Maybe they were using together. That friend's not going to go to the cops. He stole my cocaine. He didn't use cocaine, but he stole my cocaine. No, you don't report your cocaine stolen, right?
Yeah, no.
And it's historically been discussed. Some people do not report to police that they were raped while unconscious due to the consumption of illicit substances or alcohol that they were too young to be drinking. So those crimes don't get reported either. So there is going to be, it's reasonable for there to be a difference between the number of people who are crime victims and the number of people who tell the police what happened to them. And then, of course, you go to the police and you report the crime, but you don't have, like, you can describe the victim, but maybe, or you can describe the victim, you can describe the perpetrator, but you don't have proof, you don't have, there's no DNA, there's no anything. Maybe you don't go report for a week because this was somebody that you were close to, something along those lines. Or you were passed out drunk at Julie's party, but you don't find out till a week later that somebody did something to you. You can go report that to the police all you want, but now all the evidence is gone because you showered at least once during that week, unless you're really screwed up.
Yeah.
Right? So the number of police recorded crimes would be different from the number of reports as well, because there are times when you just don't have evidence to back your allegation, even if the crime happened. And then, of course, B, there's also going to be people who are going to, on a survey like this, they're going to say, oh yeah, this happened to me, this totally happened to me, and I reported it to the police. And maybe they did, but it never happened. Or the story isn't true. Like, they say there was no consent, but actually there was, and so that that difference between reported and recorded crimes can't even be used as a false allegation rate, because some of those are false, some of those are not.
Yeah.
So he says, I concentrate on adult women age 16 and over. Item 1 provides the percentage of women age 16 to 59 who reported rape in the last year for the years 2004 and 5 to the years 2019 and 2020. This is based on the sample survey by the CSEW and will be subject to a fairly wide error bar. The number of women aged 16 to 59 in England and Wales increased from 16 to 18 million over the period. 16 million to 18 million between 2005 and 2020.
Oh, wait, that's just the population.
Not the victims.
It's like, whoa, what are they doing over there?
Those were the victims of childbirth. And immigration. Some women moved there. Multiplying this population by the percentage of reported rape victims gives our best estimate of the number of genuine female rape victims in this age range. And he has this figure. So, the number of women who reported being victimized sort of bounces all over the place here. This blue dot line, and between 2004 and 2006, so that would be 2005, it is in between 100,000 and 120,000. Probably pretty close to 110,000. It goes all the way up to almost 180,000 in 2006. At its lowest point in 2014, it has dropped down to approximately 50,000. But so you'll notice it's like bouncing all over the place. The top point is above 180,000 in 2011, and it gets almost that high in 2006, and then those are the only 2 years when it's that high. There's a big shift in 2012 at the point of something called Operation U-Tree, which I'm not aware of.
Yeah, I'm curious as to what that is.
What's interesting, the number that report the crime is really high, but the number that report to police stays between about 18 or 19,000 and about, looks like maybe 38,000 up until Operation U-Tree, and it drops down to what looks like approximately 10,000, in the range of 10,000, and stays there after 2012. The police-reported crime starts out and stays pretty steady from 2005 to 2012. It looks like approximately 8 or 9,000. And then in 2014, it starts to rise up and sort of steadily goes up till 2020, when it looks like it's starting to plateau again at 40,000. So there's the changes go in the opposite direction. The number of women claiming to have been victimized and the number of women reporting both drop at 2012, but the number of police reported, police recording that there was a crime, goes up.
Which I don't really understand the distinction there. I mean, is this the police walking up on the crime happening and reporting? I mean...
Well, I do recall that at some point in the last couple decades in the UK, there was a scandal where the police were prosecuting cases that were not valid. And there were a lot of false and malicious prosecutions because of a change in their criteria. And I want to say that was in around like 2014, 2016. But I don't think it was called Operation U-Tree. Or is that... Yeah, Operation U-Tree. So, Operation U-Tree was a British police investigation into sexual abuse allegations, predominantly the abuse of children, against the English... Let's see... The English media... personality Jimmy Savile and others. So, that's weird. Operation U-Tree happens and women start not making allegations. Ended in 2015, but was absorbed by Operation Winter Key, which was launched in 2015. Also absorbed other sexual abuse investigations, including Operation Fairbank. The Met Police's umbrella inquiry into historical sexual abuse claims involving politicians and public figures. So I guess when a bunch of public figures got accused, they didn't have time to deal with women making false allegations. I don't know, but there were more allegations, I guess, by children. So there you go. Item 2 tells us that the CSEW asked what percentage of these rape victims told police in years 2014, 2017, and 2020. In 2014, they reported 17% told the police. In 2017 and 2020 combined, they reported that 15.8% told police. I shall assume that 17% applies from 2005 to 2016 and 15.8 thereafter. By multiplying the above best estimate of the number of genuine rape victims by this percentage, gives us our best estimate of the number of reports of rape to police that are genuine for women aged 16 to 59. And again, he's referencing this figure 1. Finally, item 3 provides the number of rape crimes recorded by the police for adult women 16 and over, which again, for our purposes, I identify as a number of allegations. This is also plotted in figure 1. Note that this is a very different measure of allegations from that used in most of the sources quoted by Rumney, because it refers to the numbers of complaints which the police have classed as crimes. Thus, the main source of contention in interpreting the data quoted by Rumney is avoided, namely the inclusion as allegations those complaints ultimately designated as no crime by the police. So figure 1 shows there was a large drop in the CSEW-based estimate of rapes between 2012 and 2013, the reasons for which are unknown to him. The volume of rape crimes recorded by police has increased since 2012. The reason for this is, at least in part, due to poor police recording practices in earlier years, and this is acknowledged in CSEW 2017. So they didn't record as many cases, in other words, or they didn't record as accurately or document as effectively back then. The same source does, however, also identify the effect of Operation U-Tree, the post-Seville investigations, in increasing the number of reports to police, including encouragement to report historical offenses. Operation U-Tree started in 2012, and figure 1 shows that prior to that date, the number of police-recorded rape crimes was less than our estimate of the number of genuine reports of rape to police. Perhaps partly because the police were no-criming too many complaints, and partly simply due to poor record keeping. So they're both ignoring evidence in some cases, or misinterpreting evidence in some cases, and then also not documenting properly when they get evidence in some cases, which would destroy a case. From 2014 onwards, the number of police-recorded rape crimes has exceeded our estimate of the number of genuine reports of rape to the police, the difference yielding my estimate of the number of false allegations. Figure 2 shows this as a percentage of the number of police-recorded rape crimes, i.e. the apparent false allegation rate. It has become disconcertingly high. And here we are looking at from 0 to 100 here, and it starts out at about 30 in 2014 and goes up to 80 in 2019, drops back down to 60 in 2020. And I think it was between 2019 and 2020 that it came out that police were designating false allegations as crimes and referring false allegations for prosecution to meet criteria that were set for them by politicians, because they were accused of designating true allegations as no crime and refusing to refer them for prosecution. So there's an overcorrection there.
Yeah.
I invite readers to deconstruct the argument and to check the data. My own observations are as follows. The weak link is the CSEW estimate of the percentage of victims reporting to the police. Because this relates to women's experience over life since age 16. It is possible, even likely, that reporting rates have been substantially greater in recent years. If so, the implied rate of false allegations from 2014 would be smaller than given in Figure 2. Another issue is that the CSEW data relates to the number of victims, whereas the police data relates to the number of crimes. This means that the more women who are unfortunate enough to be raped more than once in a year, the more the CSEW-based victim data would underestimate the number of true reported rapes, and the argument fails. And so that takes us kind of back to that Lissac research that he used to claim there was an epidemic of serial rape on university campuses, when in fact what he found was that the majority of rape may be perpetrated by a small handful of very disturbed individuals that are serial rapists. The other possibility with that is in a situation of perpetual abuse, like by one individual against another for a period of time. Say, like my circumstance or the circumstance of any child that is molested by a family member, or like in my case, it was a foster kid who was older than me, who was fostered by a family member, and then they didn't give him the treatment he needed to recover from his own victim experience. And so there are circumstances where an individual who is young might experience something like that over and over again, and the same person might commit that crime over and over again. And if the police end up charging that individual later based on an allegation, and they are able to prove several instances of that perpetration, they might charge those as separate crimes. And so they would charge them with so many counts of that crime. That would make it look like, to the untrained eye, like 10, or however many, like that number of charges was, of people went out and committed that crime against that number of victims, when in fact it was actually one perpetrator against one victim repeatedly. And so that's one thing. And then another thing is, if you have like the situation on university campuses that is most likely to lead to a charge would be somebody passed out at a party. Somebody who maybe isn't aware, and somebody who takes advantage of that. The kind of person that would take advantage of that is not just going to do it once. They're going to do it over and over again. Yeah. So they may have a number of victims, and that would be the serial rapist. And then there are also serial victims, where people make themselves vulnerable because they have had some sort of experience during their childhood that disrupted their development of defenses of their own boundaries against incursion by other people, infractions by other people. And the person that you would expect this from is that doormat that always says yes to everything, that gets roped into overtime they can't handle, or being the room mother for their kids' classroom when they actually have a full-time job and a part-time job, or doing the at the church cooking for their mother-daughter picnic at their church, where they run the kitchen for the day instead of just showing up with a covered dish like all the other women. Like that person is that doesn't have time for those things, but says yes to them anyway because they don't have it in them to argue with the pushy lady that's asking them, would you do this? That person is more likely to be the serial victim type, than say somebody who's like, I just don't have time, I'm sorry, I can't, like that. And that happens where you would see multiple acts of perpetration, but one person is reporting them. So the numbers can get skewed either way. That one victim, multiple perpetrators. Readers will note that the police data relate to age 16 and above, where the CSEW data relate to age 16 to 59. So the police data doesn't stop at age 59. It might include elderly people who are in a vulnerable position that's different than younger people. And it is an unfortunate truth that in care homes for the elderly, abuse is rampant and sexual abuse occurs as well.
Yeah.
So there's victimization that may be reported, and it's sometimes easier to catch those people because there's always people around in a nursing home, in a care home for the elderly. There's always a floor nurse. There's always another nurse's aide somewhere in the vicinity, and there's often a roommate or family members that might come in and walk in on it. Family members, if they're suspicious, might put in a nanny cam and catch the individual, and there's been news stories of people being caught that way. So it's easier to detect those crimes. So that might skew the numbers a little bit as well. A higher percentage of perpetrators might get caught. Readers will note that the police data relate to age 16, and I read that. However, I do not believe this is important. The CSCW also provides rape data for ages 16 to 74, and these data imply that the number of victims aged 60 and over is not large, does not significantly perturb the argument. So, his conclusion is the term rate of false rape allegations is highly ambiguous, has no agreed definition. Relatable quantification of the rate of false rape allegations, even given a specific definition, remains elusive, so we can't really be sure. Claims that the rate of false rape allegations is less than 10% are actually based on lower bounds. There's no compelling evidence that the true rate might not be far greater, and much highly uncertain evidence that it might be. And then finally, there is some contestable evidence that false rape allegation rates have increased since Operation U-Tree in the UK, but quantification is uncertain. So then if you look at the link to this is in the low bar, so if anybody wants to go to it, he actually has detailed referencing linked at the bottom of this. So my conclusion on this is this article, the most valuable thing in this article is that it doesn't just prove that we don't know how many allegations of rape are false, but it tears apart the claim that we do know based on criteria that's very concrete. We don't have a solid definition of what constitutes a false allegation. Right? We don't have a solid definition of a solid set of criteria for placing an allegation in that category, and different research that has led to different rates in its reporting has used different criteria and may represent, rather than representing percentage of allegations that are actually false as reported, it actually often represents a lower bound, meaning there's a range of rate of false allegations. At least this many are false, but it probably is more. So when feminists tell you 2%, you can throw that out entirely. At least 10% of allegations are false, and it's very likely that more than 10% are false. There is some research that says as high as 90%, and so the number is somewhere between 10% and 90%. We can't be sure, and it is therefore important, very important, even based on the feminist claim that a rarity of false allegations would make it unimportant to address it, based on the fact that we don't know how rare it is, and that at least 1 in 10 of those allegations is false. It merits rigorous due process standards in order to ensure that we are not falsely imprisoning or encouraging wrongful vigilante violence against falsely accused men. If that makes sense. So when you get into arguments with people on social media, or if you are dealing with, people in your life that say this, well, we shouldn't focus on the due process rights of the accused in rape cases because false allegations are rare. You can now say, hey, wait a minute. Like, first of all, the claim of rarity is a woozle. It came from a claim made by a police chief that didn't actually have any evidence to back that claim. Second of all, what research has shown is that at the very least, 1 in 10 allegations are false. At least 1 in 10. Possibly as high as 9 in 10. And the real number is somewhere in between. So with that, let me see if I have any further... I've been reading the super chats, because they've been popping up in my face. And I've read that one already, so that's the last one we got. So let me look at the super chows. And again, I am searching for this stupid category. There we go. Super chows. There we go. Okay. HBR News 410 on Amazon Lookout. Alright, we probably read this, but I'm going to read it anyway because it's after Brian wrote done. People constantly cede their private property rights to companies. In these contracts, this is on Amazon Lockout, $5. In these contracts, the terms of service that people enter into with web companies, the contracts almost always have some type of clause that says, we, the company, can cut you off from our service whenever we want, for whatever reason we want, regardless of whether we want to tell you or not. Oh, and if you build your life around our service, it's not our fault if it all comes crumbling down because we decided to pull the rug out under your feet. So there's in the United States... There's a precedent, and I found it once, and I haven't been able to find it since, that basically says those kind of clauses are unreasonable and don't apply. People believe they can't do anything, but they can. Like those blanket clauses. You have to have more specificity, and they have to be reasonable. Like, when you pay for a service... a clause that says we can take your money and then not give you the service without giving you a reason. There's, I can't remember what the precedent was, but it basically says that that's invalid because it's saying that the contract itself is meaningless. Unfortunately, that doesn't necessarily protect people in other countries. But yeah, people do sign over an awful lot. There was a company that put ownership of your soul in their terms of service to see who was reading it, and I guess it took forever before someone complained. Like, did you actually put ownership of my soul in your terms of service? Most people just signed it over. So, because they're not reading. Because the terms of service is like 500 pages long. Meredith G gave us $5 and said, honey for the badgers, and thanks for deconstructing many of the talking points used by feminists. Zapier gave us $50 and said, sorry for being rude to the head badger on the bird app. You guys can be TERFs if you want, but that does mean I will take jabs at you periodically. It's just business. So I am completely at a loss here because I haven't been on Twitter for about a month because I've been speaking of overtime, nobody wants to do the kind of job I do, like my day job. People are afraid to be direct support professionals, or it doesn't pay enough to support their household and they don't do the job. And so we keep losing our second shift and so I've been picking up a lot of extra time. But I'm also paying to replace some plumbing and stuff in a home, so it all works out, right? So whatever conversation that was, I missed it, and I don't know what your definition of TERF is. Like, some people call you a TERF if you don't support trenders, and I think that's bullshit.
Yeah.
Like, trenders, I differentiate between trenders and people who have historically demonstrated that they are trans. And like, one set of the trender set is exploiting compassion for the experiences of actual transgender people. And that there's always going to be, when there's a victim set or a set of people with a disadvantage that deserve compassion and need a special approach from society, there's always going to be people that try to fake being part of that group, or try to imagine themselves being part of that group, try to weasel their way in to benefit from the compassion even though they have no need for it. Like, for crying out loud, there's even been people that have faked cancer to get benefits of that. So I just... And, Tyler Preston pointed out, 4chan calls trenders troons to differentiate them from actual trans people. That makes sense, because a lot of the people that are going over the top and exploiting that compassion are cartoonish in their behavior, so that's very fitting. But
I don't care what you call me, just don't call me a feminist, okay?
Yeah. But I mean, if you were rude to Allison, it's kind of like kicking a puppy.
Yeah.
But if you were rude to Allison, apologizing to me doesn't do any good. Apologize to Allison.
Yeah.
She's the one who deserves your apology. If you are trying to apologize, it's not really much of an apology here. And if you're trying to explain something to me, it helps if you explain your definition for TERF. Plain Dane gave us $5 and said, did he have one of those portable holes you see in the Looney Tunes? Oh, that's great. Yeah. Maybe she had a portable hole, and that's why...
Oh, God.
Oh, jeez. This takes me back to my college D&D days. Like, every time we got a portable hole. It's a rare magical item, and it works exactly like the cartoon portable hole, except it's got spatial limitations, how much you can put in, how wide you can open it, and so on. And every time I get out the portable hole, everybody would snicker, all of us in the room. We couldn't help it. Grabs black circle, tosses it at the wall, and he sticks his dick in it. Is he the villain from the movie Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Plain Dane, you made my day. Jeez. That's great.
Oh, that's awesome.
And that's our Super Chows. Let's take a look at Rumble. Rumble has a whole bunch of comments. We don't have any paid Rumble rants, but serial rapists like Corn Pop.
Yeah. Oh, God.
Thank you, Mangaka92. That was great. Oh, God, there is the term bonus hole now, Richard Beer says. I'm assuming that's the difference between red eye and brown eye, right? Pink eye and brown eye. The bonus hole. Depending on the how used it is, it might be the better of the two. Let's see. Oh yeah, Mangaka92 says we were talking about men pretending to have money they don't. sort of like how women pretend to have breasts they don't, a pretty face they don't, a flat stomach they don't, etc. And like the flat stomach thing hit me really hard one time. I have a bulging disc in my lower back and lower lumbar. It's a work injury that I never got workers' comp for because I didn't realize when I was employed with that employer that it was as bad as it is. And honestly, if I'd known then that it was that bad, but I also knew of the disability that I have, I'm not sure I would have treated it as a workers' comp thing anyway, because not everybody has the same weakness. Like, I probably never should have been a nurse's aide, at least not at that nursing home. So anyway, so I have this herniated disc, and well, it's not herniated anymore; it's bulging disc, but it's bulging toward the inside, toward the spine. And when I put on extra pounds, which during the COVID farce, I went up to 210 pounds, which is a lot for me. My high school weight's 125 pounds. So that tells you quite a bit there. Right? I went up to 210 pounds and I had a big gut, and it pulls on the muscles around that disc, and it causes compression, and it causes pinched nerves and sciatic nerve pain. So it's very painful to have a fat belly for me, and to have an unsupported fat belly. And I discovered years ago when I was photographing weddings, and like after I had my son and I was taking off the baby weight, that corsets support exactly that area and actually help prevent my back pain from being as bad. So I always wore corsets when I photographed weddings. I'd wear a corset under the outfit, like my professional attire, just to make it so I could stand on my feet for 12 hours without having back pain that would cause me to be crippled. And I look at those, and they really do slim down your waist a lot. They make you a lot more attractive, right? So I recently was looking at ads on my phone that crop up, when I play phone games and stuff, and there's this clothing device that's being advertised now that has the effect of a corset, but it's fabric. It's not as binding and confining as a corset. And it shows these women, and they have these huge bulging biffs, but in front for the uninitiated, right? And they roll this up over their belly. And all of a sudden, they got this lovely hourglass. And I'm just amazed. And I'm like, what happens when she goes to bed with somebody and she takes that thing off?
Oh, forget it.
Like, do they make any of those where it's crotchless? And so you can keep it on? Michael Fox, yes, that is exactly what I have, Ehlers Danlos. You pegged it. And yeah, they're called Spanx. Richard, and it's funny because like those were they're quite dramatic in the change they make. Oh, somebody says, look again, there were Rumble rants. So let me reload. Let's see if I can. Oh, I see. Wait, I can see. Okay, so we have Awesome Cool 3 says at Badger Livestream. What about just false allegations? Oh no, that one's Awesome Cool 3 gave us $5 and said, I complained about being sexually harassed by my female boss. When I reported it to female HR, I was accused of being violent and fired. Right now, I am trying to start my own bookkeeping business. Yeah, that's a rough one, and I will tell you right now, it's not just the women at HR. The training they get at HR is that if there's a conflict between a guy and a female employee, the guy is the bad guy. Duluth model training is everywhere.
Yeah.
So, and of course, the kind of guy that's going to become an HR representative is going to be the male feminist type, or the tradcon type that thinks that it's men's job to keep women safe and make them feel comfortable. So they're both going to be the types that are going to presume you the bad guy. And HR training, it's not even necessarily the fault of your company. It's not necessarily corporate. There are, if I understand correctly, there are federal standards for that training that have been lobbied into place by feminists as part of the Violence Against Women Act. So HR training is based on state mandated standards. So you're looking at, if there was no government, you wouldn't have this problem. And best of luck starting your own bookkeeping business. That's probably the better way to go, simply because you can, among other things, it's up to you whether you advance with different software capabilities and AI and all that. It's up to you what direction your business takes and everything. You're not at the mercy of some middle management idiot deciding that this new thing that's happening that looks like it's going to be the way all the businesses are going isn't as important as everybody says it is, right? You get to decide that yourself. So the success of your business is in your hands and not the hands of some idiot. And we have NobaFan21 gave us $1 and said, I find it funny feminists both think the 2% is real and that so many women voted the wrong way in 2016, but not once wonder if their enemies would be more patriarchal if the 2% was higher. Yeah, women are either perfect and cannot be criticized and smarter than men, equal in every way except all the ways in which they're better than men, when that fits feminist arguments. But as soon as they want to portray women as victims or criticize something a woman does, then women are stupid, weak, have no personal agency, don't know what they're talking about, right? Can't make their own decisions. They're bad guys. They're malicious, dangerous, have to be managed, and need men to take care of them and protect them and make their decisions for them. Because, feminism. And that is all of the Rumble rants. But yeah, in regard to that double standard on looks, I will simply refer you all to the old Dr. Demento song, and I can't remember who the actual performer of the tune was. The biggest parakeets in town. About a chick with an Avery, and all the euphemisms and innuendos about all the different birds. Among them was the tale of a guy who marries the chick with the biggest parakeets in town, but as he goes to caress her, he sees them on the dresser. The biggest parakeets in town. And there you go. So with that, I will thank everybody for listening. Thanks to my two co-hosts for going over this article with me. I want thanks to Rick Bradford for writing this also.
Yes.
This was a great analysis. And like I said, everybody listening, I recommend bookmarking it. So in my low bar, down underneath this video, is a link to this article. The link is also on the Honey Badger blog page for this. It's on our Patreon page for this as well. So this link is very prevalently displayed. And when you start hearing from people in social media debate and elsewhere that, hey, this is this is not an important discussion because only 2% of rape allegations are false. You can call bullshit, and you can show them this article and talk about the issues with detailing and enumerating the percentage of false allegations. And thanks to everybody who works in the background to make HBR Talk happen. Good night, all.
Good night, y'all.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have like a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.